Hi, welcome to the last critical main line in the Gukesh Qgd system. The variation arises after d4 d5, c4 e6, knight c3 knight f6, cd ed, bishop g5, bishop b4, e3 h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, knight e4, and queen c2. There are sidelines, of course, which we will be covering in this chapter with rook c3, rook c1, queen b3, queen a4, a3. But the critical main line of this chapter is queen c2, which has been tried by several players, Anish Giri being one of them. White defends the white defends the knight with the queen on c2 and doesn't waste time with knight ge2, which obstructs the bishop on f1. However, the drawback is this bishop on g3 is not guarded with the knight. So in a lot of lines, we may be able to spoil white's pawn structure on the king side. By the way, it's important to note that queen c2 is the most played move in the Leech's database, which basically means that if you are an online player, queen c2 might be the most common move which you'll face in your online game. So maybe it's good to have a look at this. Rook c1. We'll start with the sidelines and let's start with rook c1. White's idea is that after knight c3, White's idea is that knight c3 runs into bc3, of course. And basically, instead of wasting time with the queen, you bring your rook into the game. The drawback is that white can now never play a3 because knight c3, bc3, and we have bishop into a3. That's why we can comfortably play h5, threaten to win the bishop with h4. And if white plays f3, white can't play h3 or h4 because of knight into g3. And after f3, we just play knight into g3, h into g3. And now white wants to probably play queen b3 and queen a4 check, harass the weaknesses in our position. So we very comfortably play c6, defend the d5 pawn, prevent queen a4 check. And now we are preparing something like queen e7, bishop e6, knight d7, and so on. We then want to castle long, and basically we remain better due to better pawn structure and the pair of bishops. Queen b3 is also, this is rare, but it has been played by decent players. It was played by Ding, and this is popular on leeches. So again, a move which we should be careful of. Now white attacks our weakness on d5 and our bishop on b4. So what do? Do we play a passive move? No, we counter attack with c5, preparing to play knight c6 and queen a5, targeting the weaknesses on d4 and c3. A good thing to note that because of queen b3, the queen doesn't defend the pawn on d4, which it did with the queen on d1, so we can have additional pressure over the d4 pawn. White's main move is d into c5, but there are some lines which we need to be careful of. There is bishop b5 check, which has been tried very often. White develops a piece with a tempo and wants to play knight g2 and castle. We get our knight into the game and also put pressure on this pawn, knight g2. And how do we play cd4? We can't play it because the king is pinned. So we play castle first. And now we have two ideas. We may play cd4 in some lines, but the key idea is to play c4, gain some space, and force the queen back. And white has some issues due to the queen on b3 because you are losing a tempo, and black can also play knight g3 and at some point win the bishop pair. White cannot castle because of knight d2, and because of that, black's position stands slightly more comfortable. If white plays bishop into b8, with the idea that after rook b8, white wants to play bishop b5 check, and we don't have knight c6, we can just comfortably play king f8. Note that we can't play bishop d7 due to queen into d5, and this knight is hanging, as well as white is threatening bishop d7. And after king f8, although we can't castle naturally, we can artificially castle with king g7. And white does not have the pieces to attack us on the king side. White's dark square bishop is missing. Without the dark square bishop, there is no attack. As I've already mentioned, a weakness is a weakness only if it can be exploited. In this case, white can't. And then we have these active pieces. We have the bishop on b4, which is very active. The knight on e4 stands very active too. And we have more space in the center. We have the pair of bishops as well. So everything seems to be in black's favor. So instead of bishop b8, white's most critical test is d into c5. We play knight c6, and now what do we defend the bishop, and now we have two ideas. We want to play queen a5 and put pressure on this knight, or we want to play knight into c5, gain a tempo, and then get queen to f6 and probably play bishop e6 or bishop f5 and castle long. We may also castle short depending upon the position's requirement, and this position seems to be pretty good for black from a practical viewpoint. We have more space, we have more active pieces, and we have a lead in development as well. Also, it's important to note that white can't castle as easily as we can. King is not safe on c1, while our king on g8 will be very reasonably safe, even though we have a pawn on g5. Why? Because white can't exploit it. White cannot open the position with h4 due to knight into g3. That brings us to queen a4 check, which is an inferior version of queen b3, because now you're not even defending the knight on c3. We just develop a piece with knight c6, defend the b4 bishop, and now we want to play knight into c3. White's only try can be bishop b5, with the idea that knight into c3 is met with bishop into c6, bc6, queen b4, and white is spoiling our pawn structure on the queen side. But we start with bishop into c3, and after bc3, we have spoiled white's pawn structure, even though we have lost the bishop pair, but we play bishop d7. Now white has very obvious weaknesses on the light squares and the c3 pawn on the queen side, while at the same time we are threatening to play h5, force h3, and then win the bishop and spoil white's pawn structure on the king side. We are also threatening knight into c3, by the way, and if white retreats with the queen to c2, we just play knight a5, and you kind of have to defend against all these weaknesses. While after bishop d7, queen d7, the king goes over to the king side, the queen side, and is very safe. White's king is not safe on the king side because we may always open it up with h5, h4. So this move is also not so great. That brings us to a3, which is actually a very good sideline. So if I have to pick any sidelines out of rook c1, queen b3, queen a4, and a3, I'll pick a3. In fact, this is what my practice partner used to play against me when testing me out in the Manhattan system. After a3, white's point is that we have to play bishop into c3 because knight c3 runs into queen b3. If the bishop goes back, white has queen c3, and now these pawns on the king side are a bit vulnerable. White can play h4, while we have no initiative since this active knight is traded. While if we play bishop a3 and try to win the pawn, white now plays bc3, bishop e7, and knight f3. Even though we are up a pawn, white's pieces are superior. And as we have already discussed earlier, we want to keep our pieces on most active squares, and we want to be the side making threats. We don't want our opponent to be making threats on us. So we play bishop into c3, give up the bishop pair, but spoil white's pawn structure. And after bc3, our typical knight c6. The knight is developed. We control the e5 square. So that means we are threatening h5. And now we are threatening knight into c3 because white cannot play bishop e5 in lines like this. White had some ideas of bishop e5 somewhere. Here we also stop that. White cannot play f3 because this allows us to play knight g3 and spoil the king side pawn structure. And after h3, we play the typical queen d6. We want to play bd7 and castle long. Then we have these amazing weaknesses to attack against. and our idea would be to bring the rooks into the game or attack the weakness on e3 and c3 with knight a5, knight c4, getting the knight to an active square. If white by any chance plays g4 somewhere, we may open up the king side with h5 or f5. In general, we don't mind losing a pawn if we are able to open up the position. So white needs to play bishop d3 and develop a piece. Again, we can't play knight into c3 because white has queen b3, and knight e4 runs into bishop e4, d4, h4, where this bishop is far more active than this bishop, and we cannot play bishop e6 due to queen b7. Now white is starting to target us on the king side, and we don't want to play moves like g4, which fix the pawns on the same color as the bishop, as well as give this amazing outpost to white, which can be occupied with the knight in this way, or maybe with the bishop fixing the pawn on h6. We don't want to allow these kind of ideas. And so we start by playing bishop f5, develop a piece, and threaten to play knight c3 or knight g3 now, because we are looking to exchange the important light square bishop. We know that in QGD, we want to exchange this bishop. And now the threat is knight into c3. So let's say white plays knight f3. Now we take on c3. Because after queen c2, we have bishop d3, eliminating the light square bishop. And after queen d3, now we can play knight e4. And the difference is white cannot open up the position on the king side with h4 due to knight g3. And white doesn't have the light square bishop anymore. So this is a good position for black. If white plays queen c2, try defending the c3 pawn, we can just play queen e7 and castle long and threaten h5, h4. White can't play f3 due to knight g3, and we are very happy to swap these pair of bishops. We may also play bishop g6 at some point just to defend the bishop and then try to attack the light square weakness on c4 and occupy it with one of the knights. So after bishop f5, white probably plays knight e2 to defend c3 and get a new piece into the game. What do? Queen e7. Same idea. We want to castle long and we want to play h5, h4. By the way, it makes sense to play queen e7, not queen d7, because if we have the queen on e7, after f3, knight g3, this pawn is attacked. So in a way, we are being prophylactic against f3 with queen e7. A small but a very instructive point. So this a3, even though it's interesting, we have no problems. And we come to queen c2, the most critical sideline. White defends the knight and puts pressure on our knight on e4 at the same time. Because white has not committed knight ge2, this bishop is now open and can come to d3 or to b5. How do we react to this? By the typical h5, gaining space on the king side and threatening to play h4 to meet bishop e5 with f6. This is an important crossroads where white has three critical moves. There is bishop e5, there is bishop d3, and there is f3. Let's start with bishop e5. White basically says that I know you're going to play h4, so let me just get out of it and not let you gain space on the king side. We deal it with by playing f6 anyways. And now we are threatening to win the bishop. So what is it that white had in mind? f3. A very cunning idea, with the point being that we have to play knight into c3. And now white has ideas of queen g6 check and bishop f6. White first needs to play bc3, because if white plays queen g6 directly, we have king f8, and white can't play bishop f6 due to the threat of knight e4, double check, a discovered check, and queen into f6 or knight into f6. So we remain with extra material. That's why white needs to play bc3 and is now threatening queen g6 check and c into b4. We don't want to make a passive move, so we play fe5, winning the bishop but making the king side slightly vulnerable. White now has to play cb4 or queen g6 check. Both of them are very similar, but let's start with queen g6 check, king f8, cb4. Now the problem with this sequence for white is that these pawns are vulnerable too, and the king is still in the center, which we can try to exploit with queen e7, threatening queen b4 check, or ed4 exploiting the spin. White is fine, but uh, white is fine, but is not better. At the same time, our threat is very obvious. We want to play queen b4, we want to play ed4, or we want to develop our pieces with knight c6 or bishop d7. The position is objectively balanced, but as usual, both the sides have plenty of chances of going wrong. If white plays cb4, we can play e into d4, exploit that white needs to play ed4. Queen g6 runs into king f8, and then as usual, we would have this motif. And if white plays ed4, we now play queen f6, prevent queen g6, attack d4, and we want to castle. White has weaknesses in their camp, which we can easily exploit with queen d4 or knight c6. And the position is very much fine for us. White's king is very weak. And that brings us an end to this variation with bishop e5. White's other idea is to play bishop d3, developing a piece and threatening bishop e4. How do we deal with it? By playing h4, trying to win the bishop. Bishop e4 is not possible due to h into g3, and we have ideas, all kind of threats in the air. White shouldn't give up the bishop for no reason. So white needs to play bishop e5. We play f6. We are looking to trap the bishop, right? How does white deal with it? By playing bishop into e4. Now we can't play fe5 due to bishop g6 check. So we need to play d into e4. White has now one good idea to get the bishop to a safe zone with d5, preparing to play queen a4 check since we can't play knight c6 anymore. And if we play bishop c3, white wants to play bishop into c3. By the way, queen into e4 is just a mistake because after fe5, queen e5, king f7, our king is very safe. We have won a piece. And if white had the light square bishop on the board, we would have to be worried. Without the light square bishop, the danger is there. I'm not denying it, but it's very low. And from a computer point of view, we are already much better here. All we need to do is just get the pieces out, maybe meet knight f3 with rook g8, defend it, and get our pieces out. And basically, if we are able to finish the development and consolidate, we must be winning. So d5. And now white is setting up the clever trap of meeting fe5 with queen a4 check and queen into b4, where all these pawns are weak. So we must be clever too. And we don't want to make a passive move. So we develop a piece with knight a6. We develop a piece and defend this bishop. White has only one square for the bishop, which is d4. The best way to play this is by playing a3 first. If white plays bishop d4, we just play queen d5. And we start making threats. If white plays bishop into f6, exploiting that this bishop is no longer attacked, we just castle. And after castle, our king is very, very safe. On the other hand, white's king is still in the center, and we have more space in the center. Our bishop's coming, while this piece is not yet developed, and we have the pair of bishops. So everything seems to be in black's favor strategically. While if white plays a3 first, we are now forced to give up the bishop. And after bishop c3, we have opposite color bishops, but our pawns are slightly more weak. We need to exploit that this pawn is hanging for temporarily, and so we play queen d5, forcing white to play bishop f6. But this way, we have eliminated one of our weaknesses, and after castle, we have a great position. After, as usual, we have development and activity of pieces, along with king safety for slightly poor positioning of our pawns. And basically, if we are able to finish our development with bishop f5 and bishop g4, we should be better. Then we would try to get the rook into the game with rook a8 and play knight c5, exploiting that there is a wonderful outpost for the knight on d3. White has only one good way to defend, that is bishop d4. If white plays bishop c3, we just play knight c5, and our knight's jumping in, harassing the pawn on f2. So bishop d4, stopping knight c5. We don't want the bishop to be on a central square where it is well placed, so we kick it off. c5. Bishop goes back, and now we can develop our bishop, but this knight is not well placed, and this bishop is very well placed. So we can play knight c7, preparing knight b5 and looking to exchange this bishop. Once we have done that, we'll have a very comfortable position, and we might also get our bishop out before taking on c3. It's a choice which we can use. We can use the option of playing knight c3 at any point. The position is balanced, but as usual, it's very complicated, and I think it's a fun position to play for both the sides. We are making threats while white has some weaknesses to attack to. That brings us an end to this variation with bishop d3. And let's go to the main line with f3. f3, so white forces us to play knight g3. But in return, white gets an open file, and white is also threatening to play g4. And after h4, white will have a weakness to attack to on g5. But we have won the bishop pair, and we have spoiled white's pawn structure. Now, there are multiple choices here. There was bishop e6, which was played by Gukesh against Giri. So this is a very reasonable alternative. There is queen e7, which is the most played move. But after king f2, I think white's better because now we have intentionally landed our queen in an uncomfortable spot. And after e4, we'll have some issues. So how do we deal with white's idea? By playing knight c6. Our idea remains the same. We want to play bishop e6, get the queen out, and castle long. Now white has two logical attempts and two inferior attempts. Bishop b5 is very logical and what I like. There is g4, which is the top choice of engine and very direct. And then there are two natural moves like bishop d3 and long castle, which are fine, but does not test us. Let's start with bishop b5, where white is forcing us to make a decision since we can't play bd7 as this pawn is weak and white might have options of a3. And white is basically threatening us to play bishop c6, spoil the pawn structure on the queen side. How do we deal with that? By playing queen d6. With queen d6, we can play queen f6, which is objectively a better move, but we are threatening queen into g3, and basically we force g4, which we meet with h4, and we transpose to the main line. So even though queen f6 is better objectively, if we anyway have to check a line, it's better just to transpose, and this is a good practical way to shut down and eliminate extra options which you don't need. Why do you want to check a line which you have to, when you have to check another one regardless? And this saves your memory space, right? So chess is not just a objective game, it's a practical game, and we are using practicality to make it easier for us to memorize these lines. If white plays bishop d3, white develops a piece but does not threaten anything at all. We can very comfortably play queen e7 after king f2 because we were threatening this. We just play bishop e6 and we can castle long. Our idea is to open up the position on the king side with g4 next, and basically white is not putting any threats at all. White has a poor pawn structure. After long castle we'll have a c4 king as well as a better pawn structure along with the bishop pair. So white's another logical move is long castle, getting the king out of the danger zone and looking to open up the position with e4. But now we just play bishop c3. Although we have to give up the bishop voluntarily, the point is after queen c3, we can play queen d6. We are attacking g3, so white has to play g4. But now we have h4, and this pawn is very weak. Because the queen is on c3, white won't have the ideas of queen g6, which arises in the main line. We'll see that. And now we have a very clear weakness to attack to, the e3 pawn. We want to play bd7, and then we want to castle long. That's our natural plan. Because the queen is not on c2 and is on c3, there is no queen g6. And that is why, even though we have given up the bishop voluntarily, the position is good for us and is better than the main line with early g4. So we come back to 13th move, g4. This is computer's top choice, but nobody has played it yet. We just play h4, and now our setup is queen f6, bishop e6, long castle. This is our desired setup, but white can play bishop b5. And the issue is, why is bishop b5, queen f6 good? Because white can't play g4 due to hg4, and we can meet knight h3 with bishop h3. So this pawn is not weak. But after g4, h4, bishop b5, we can't play queen f6 due to knight h3 and ideas of f4 after short castle. So we have to be clever, and therefore we play queen d6. We want to play bd7 long castle, and if we get that, we are just outrightly better. Because this pawn is weak, we will have ideas of h3, and we have the pair of bishops, and our king will be safe too. But the issue is, white has knight h3, and now we can't play f6 due to the idea of queen g6 check. So what do we do here? Initiative over material, bishop d7. We finish our development and we want to castle long. Short castle. Knight g5 is a bit premature because we have the tactical queen e7, exploiting that this pawn is hanging. After knight h3, queen e3, the d4 pawn is hanging, so black is already much better. So short castle, and now we can still play, we cannot play f6 still, but we can castle long. And now the threat is to play f6 and consolidate on the king side. Keep in mind that white has very obvious weaknesses. White's pieces aren't active too. So if we are able to consolidate, we are just much better. But white has knight into g5, winning up a pawn. What do? We are a pawn down. Which of our pieces is not in the game? This rook. Rook f8. Idea to play f5 and open up the position on the king side. We are just a pawn down for now. What's the big deal? And this position is already very tricky for white, but white has a very careful defense with knight h3. The idea is to meet f5 with g5 and then play f4 and shut down the king side, after which white will have a protected pass pawn. Do we allow that? Nope. f4. We stop that from happening, and the idea is that after knight f4, we sacrifice a rook with rook f4 just to keep the attack going. After ef4, queen f4, we reach a very complicated position where I think we can end the memorization part. We have multiple ideas. One is to open up the position with h3. The other is to take on d4 with the queen, where our b4 bishop will join the game too with bishop c5. We'll have the white king, if it goes to h5, is in grave danger due to the threat of opening up the position with h3. And we might have ideas of playing bishop d6 and queen h2 check as well. Objectively, the position is balanced at a very high depth, but from a practical viewpoint, this can go anywhere. But I prefer black because we already know by now that we are making threats. So this is easier for us to play practically than for white. And yeah, I think it's a great line to have some fighting chances, and this is a position where anything can go wrong for any player. I can imagine Magnus Carlsen losing this position too as white. Of course, you can lose too, but we are playing this to have winning chances as black. And that basically sums up the chapter. Let me just present a small summary of this. So our crucial moment is after knight e4, queen c2. If rook c1, it's just bad because we can play h5 and white doesn't have a3 here. Queen b3 is bad because this is hanging. We play c5, dc5, knight c6. And then we get knight c5 with a tempo. We want to play queen f6, get the bishop out, and castle long. Queen a4 is met with knight c6. And as usual, white c3 knight is bad. And we meet bishop b5 with bishop into c3, bc3, bd7. And then we want to target the weaknesses on the queen side, or else play h5 and h4. If white plays a3, we take, and play knight c6. Don't hurry with knight c3 because of queen c2, knight e4, and bishop c7. We start with knight c6, and now we want to play either h5 or bishop f5, queen e7, long castle. And for queen c2, we play h5. If white plays bishop e5, we are happy to play f6, trap the bishop. After f3, knight into c3, queen g6 is not possible due to king f8 and the discovery of knight e4. So bc3, fe5, cb4, ed, queen f6. We then want to castle long, play knight c6, and just get all of our pieces in. If white plays queen g6 check, we just play king f8, cb4, and queen e7. Basically get all the pieces out and attack those loose pawns in the center and the e3 pawn. If white plays bishop d3 here, we play h4, bishop e5, f6. The only way for white to escape with the bishop is takes, and d5. But now we have knight a6 followed by queen d5 and short castle. So that brings us to f3, where we play knight g3, h into g3. And as usual, we play knight c6, look to develop our bishop, then get our queen out and castle long, our go-to strategy in these structures. The critical line is g4. And for long castle, we take on c3, force queen c3, now play queen d6, g4, h4. And then we want to play bd7 and castle long. For g4 directly, we play h4. As usual, we want to get bishop to e6, queen to f6. And if white plays bishop b5, we play queen d6. We meet knight h3 with bd7. We are ready to sacrifice material since f6 runs into queen g6. And after short castle, long castle, knight g5, we play rook f8, looking to open up the position with f5. And after knight h3, with the idea of meeting f5 with g5 and closing the position with f4, we play f4, knight f4, rook f4, ef4, and queen f4 with a very complicated game. That sums up this chapter, and now we'll be covering white's sidelines in the Gukesh Qgd.